May 1944. England was a fortress of secrecy. Along the southeastern coast, an army seemed to be gathering, an army so vast, so powerful, that even the most skeptical German generals were convinced it could crush Europe in a single blow. From the skies above Kent and Sussex, German reconnaissance planes captured extraordinary images: thousands of tanks and trucks, endless lines of aircraft, rows of landing craft stretching across the fields. Radio chatter filled the air, supply convoys rumbled down country roads, and officers barked coded commands in makeshift headquarters. To Berlin, this could mean only one thing: the Allies were preparing for the great invasion of France. But there was one astonishing truth hidden beneath this noise and motion. None of it was real. The army that Hitler feared most, the 1st U.S. Army Group, Fusag, did not exist. The tanks were inflatable, the aircraft were wooden shells, the radio signals were fake, and the soldiers were little more than ghosts in an elaborate theater of war. Every photograph, every intercepted message, every movement was part of a carefully choreographed lie. This was Operation Fortitude, one of the most ambitious deception campaigns in military history. It was a plan born out of desperation, ingenuity, and the strategic brilliance of one man, Winston Churchill. By the spring of 1944, the Allies were preparing for Operation Overlord, the long-awaited invasion of Nazi-occupied Europe. Every decision, every movement, carried unimaginable risk. The Germans had built their Atlantic Wall, a network of bunkers, mines, and artillery stretching along the French coastline. If Hitler correctly guessed where the invasion would land, he could easily crush it. The success or failure of the entire Allied effort, and perhaps the future of the free world, depended on where the Germans believed the invasion would occur. So Churchill gave a daring order: let them see what we want them to see. His idea was not to hide the coming invasion, but to misdirect it. The Allies would make Hitler believe that their main attack would fall not on Normandy, but on Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest point between Britain and France. To sell this illusion, they needed more than camouflage or secrecy. They needed to invent an entire army. That army was the 1st U.S. Army Group, supposedly commanded by the most feared Allied general of them all, George S. Patton. To Hitler, Patton was the embodiment of the Allied war machine: bold, ruthless, and unstoppable. If Patton was seen near Dover, opposite Calais, then surely that's where the invasion would come from. Churchill and the Allied planners exploited this belief to the fullest. In fields across Kent and Essex, engineers built hundreds of inflatable Sherman tanks, arranged in perfect formation. Wooden aircraft were parked at fake airfields. Landing craft, nothing more than empty shells, were lined up on riverbanks and beaches. From above, German reconnaissance photographs showed what looked like an overwhelming invasion force. But the illusion didn't stop there. Entire radio networks came alive with fabricated traffic, mimicking the routines of real divisions, reports, logistics requests, and movement orders, all carefully timed to match the supposed army's activities. Skilled radio operators spent days and nights sending coded messages into the ether, creating the hum of a living, breathing force. To complete the illusion, General Patton himself made appearances in the region, inspecting troops, giving speeches, and being spotted by double agents. German spies dutifully reported his presence to Berlin, and their messages confirmed what Hitler already believed: that Patton's army was preparing to strike across the Channel at Calais. Behind the scenes, Churchill's network of British intelligence agents, particularly the double-cross system, ensured that these lies reached German ears. Double agents like Juan Pujol Garcia, codenamed Garbo, fed an endless stream of false information to the aware German intelligence. His reports were so consistent and convincing that the Germans trusted him more than their own officers. In one of history's most ironic twists, they even awarded him an Iron Cross for his service to Germany, not realizing he was serving Churchill all along. As D-Day approached, the deception reached its climax. German analysts, staring at reconnaissance photos, were certain the largest army in the world was massed near Dover. They saw what the Allies wanted them to see: a phantom army ready to cross the narrow Strait of Dover and attack Calais. When June 6, 1944, finally arrived, the Allies stormed the beaches of Normandy. Even as the bloodiest battle of the century raged, German commanders refused to redeploy their Calais divisions. They were convinced the Normandy invasion was just a diversion, that the real blow, led by Patton, was yet to come. For weeks, they waited for the fake army that never existed. Operation Fortitude had worked perfectly. Hitler's best units remained stuck in Calais, giving the Allies the precious time they needed to secure their beachhead and push inland. The war's greatest illusion had become its most decisive weapon. And at its heart was Winston Churchill's conviction that wars could be won not only with guns and bombs, but with ideas, imagination, and deception. The army that didn't exist had just fooled the greatest military machine in the world. The problem: invading Europe. Early 1944. The war in Europe had reached a decisive moment. After years of brutal fighting in North Africa and Italy, the Allies stood poised to strike at the very heart of Hitler's empire. But one immense challenge lay ahead: crossing the English Channel and establishing a foothold in Fortress Europe. Everyone knew the invasion was coming. For months, Allied bombers had pounded railways, airfields, and coastal defenses. German intelligence was flooded with reports of troop buildups across Britain. The only question, the one that haunted both Hitler and the Allied High Command, was where the blow would fall. From a purely military perspective, Pas-de-Calais was the obvious choice. It was the narrowest point between Britain and France, only 21 miles across. The beaches there were ideal for landing craft, the ports nearby could support a massive supply chain, and the road network led straight toward Germany. To Hitler, it was the logical invasion site. But that very logic was the trap the Allies would exploit. Behind closed doors in London and at Eisenhower's headquarters, Allied planners debated their options. The final decision had already been made. The main landing would occur on the beaches of Normandy, further west, a region less fortified, less expected. But this choice came with terrifying risks. The beaches at Normandy had no major ports. The weather was unpredictable. And once the first wave of soldiers landed, they would be vulnerable to German counterattack. If Hitler realized the true location of the invasion too soon, he could unleash his panzer divisions from Calais and crush the landing before it had a chance to succeed. That was the nightmare that haunted Churchill and Eisenhower. In a single blunt phrase, Churchill described the stakes. If we are wrong about where the enemy expects us, all our plans will collapse like a house of cards. They needed to make sure that when D-Day came, Hitler's most powerful forces, especially the armored divisions under Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, stayed far away from Normandy. And the only way to do that was through deception. To understand the magnitude of the problem, picture the strategic map in mid-1944. The German army stretched across Europe, defending an immense coastline. But their most dangerous and mobile units were concentrated near Calais, ready to respond to any crossing of the Channel. Meanwhile, Allied troops were amassing in southern England, a force of over 3 million men, thousands of tanks, and tens of thousands of aircraft. The logistics were staggering. Every ship, every crate of ammunition, every vehicle had to be positioned precisely. One misstep could cost hundreds of thousands of lives. To buy time for their soldiers on the beaches, the Allies had to freeze the German High Command in indecision. Hitler had to believe, without a shadow of a doubt, that Calais was the real target. Even when the invasion at Normandy began, he had to assume it was a diversion. That was the genius of Operation Bodyguard, the master deception plan that included many sub-operations, the most famous of which was Operation Fortitude. The idea wasn't merely to fool German intelligence once. It was to build an alternate reality, one so convincing that even after the first shots were fired in Normandy, Hitler would cling to it. In a series of tense meetings, Churchill, Eisenhower, and their top strategists, including the brilliant planners at the London Controlling Section, laid out the framework. There would be Fortitude North, convincing the Germans that an invasion would strike Norway. And then, far more critical, Fortitude South, aimed at convincing Hitler that the main assault would hit Pas-de-Calais. To sell this illusion, the Allies needed to use every tool imaginable: fake armies, false radio networks, double agents, dummy tanks, and even stagecraft borrowed from movie studios. Churchill, who had always loved drama and showmanship, reportedly said, "In war, truth is so precious that she should always be attended by a bodyguard of lies." This was his philosophy made real, deception not as a side tactic, but as a core weapon of war. Meanwhile, Hitler and his generals were drowning in conflicting reports. Reconnaissance photos showed mysterious new installations along the British coast. Radio intercepts revealed endless troop movements. And their most trusted spies, who were, in reality, working for the British, confirmed it all. By the time D-Day approached, the German High Command was completely convinced. The invasion, they believed, would come at Calais, and the forces massed in southern England were simply a decoy. But, in truth, the opposite was happening. The real invasion force, hundreds of thousands of men, was secretly gathering on the southern coast, facing Normandy. And when the time came to launch, their survival would depend on whether the Germans took the bait. Churchill's deception plan wasn't just a clever trick. It was the difference between victory and catastrophe. If the Germans moved their panzer divisions to Normandy within the first 48 hours, the invasion might fail, the beaches might be overrun, and the war could drag on for years. Thus, the problem was clear: convince Hitler that the real invasion would strike Calais, not Normandy. And so began one of the most audacious lies ever told in the history of warfare, a lie so vast and so perfectly orchestrated that it would deceive an entire empire. The birth of a ghost army. It began in total secrecy, an army that existed only on paper, in radio waves, and in the imagination of the enemy. In early 1944, under Churchill's guidance and with Eisenhower's approval, the Allies created one of the boldest illusions in military history, the first U.S. Army Group, or FUSAG. On maps and memos, it looked like a colossal invasion force, hundreds of thousands of troops under the command of one of the most feared generals alive, George S. Patton. But in reality, FUSAG was a phantom, a carefully constructed lie. Patton was the perfect choice to lead a fake army. To the Germans, he was the Allies' most aggressive and unpredictable commander, the Blitz General. After his real command in North Africa and Sicily, his name carried an aura of unstoppable momentum. Even though he'd been sidelined after a disciplinary scandal, Hitler and his generals refused to believe he was out of action. In their minds, wherever Patton went, invasion would follow. That assumption became the cornerstone of Operation Fortitude South. The plan was simple in concept but staggering in execution. Convince German intelligence that Patton was assembling a massive force in southeast England, opposite Pas-de-Calais, the logical invasion point. But how do you make a fake army look real? The answer lay not in soldiers or generals, but in artists, carpenters, radio operators, and illusionists. Across the countryside near Dover and Canterbury, empty fields were transformed into sprawling military camps. Teams of engineers and set designers built inflatable Sherman tanks, full-scale replicas made of rubberized canvas. From the air, they looked exactly like real armor divisions. Soldiers even moved them around periodically, leaving convincing tracks in the mud. Nearby, wooden aircraft were assembled in neat rows on makeshift airstrips. Dummy landing craft bobbed along riverbanks and estuaries, nothing but plywood and canvas, but to Luftwaffe reconnaissance planes flying high above, they appeared utterly genuine. Even supply dumps, fuel barrels, and tents were placed strategically to sell the illusion of a massive living army preparing for invasion. And then came the sound. To complete the deception, radio specialists from the Royal Corps of Signals and the U.S. Signal Corps began transmitting an entire web of false radio traffic. Messages buzzed day and night, orders, logistics, even mundane chatter about rations and maintenance. Every word was designed to be intercepted by German intelligence. The fake army didn't just look real, it talked like it too. At Dover Castle, military cartographers worked on forged maps. Clerks prepared fake troop rosters. Even weather reports were generated for imaginary airfields. The illusion became so detailed that Allied intelligence officers joked it was the most organized non-existent army in the world. To enhance the credibility of the ruse, real units were temporarily relocated into the area to create activity, then quietly moved out, leaving behind the dummies. Locals were sworn to secrecy, military police guarded the camps, and entire transport convoys drove in circles to simulate troop movement. Churchill's intelligence chiefs brought in some of the most creative minds in Britain to assist: stage magicians, theater designers, and even artists from Pinewood Studios, the home of British cinema. They understood the psychology of illusion, how light, shadow, and perspective could make the unreal appear tangible. And above it all, Patton's reputation sealed the lie. He was seen touring the camp, inspecting fake units, delivering speeches to actors posing as soldiers. The Germans, watching through reconnaissance and radio interception, were convinced. Their reports to Berlin described the presence of Patton's elite invasion force, 150,000 men strong, backed by thousands of tanks and aircraft, poised to strike Calais at any moment. Every photograph, every radio intercept, every rumor reinforced the illusion. The deception reached even the Abwehr, Germany's feared intelligence agency, whose double agents, now secretly working for the British under Operation Double Cross, confirmed Fusag's existence as fact. The stage was now fully set. From a handful of inflatable tanks, dummy planes, and ghost transmissions, the Allies had conjured an army that could not fight, could not march, but could deceive. An army built not of flesh and steel, but of air and imagination. And the Germans believed every word of it. As the days ticked closer to D-Day, this phantom force would become one of the most valuable weapons in the Allied arsenal. Because when the real invasion began on the beaches of Normandy, Hitler's panzers, the armored divisions that could have destroyed the landings, would still be waiting at Calais, expecting Patton's ghost army to arrive. The deception had worked far better than anyone dared hope. Spies, signals, and secrecy. By the spring of 1944, the deception was no longer confined to fields and inflatable tanks. It had moved into the shadow world of espionage. What had begun as a bluff of rubber and plywood now evolved into one of the most intricate webs of intelligence manipulation in modern warfare. At its center stood a handful of extraordinary individuals, double agents, men and women who lived their lives between lies and loyalty. Their mission: to make Hitler believe that Patton's phantom army was real, armed, and ready to strike Calais. Among them was Juan Pujol Garcia, codenamed Garbo, perhaps the most successful double agent in history. From his modest London flat, Garbo spun a web of completely fabricated intelligence reports. He described entire divisions moving through Kent and Sussex, tanks assembling in Dover, and generals meeting in secret. Each message was carefully timed to coincide with the activities of the fake army. To the Germans, Garbo was one of their most trusted informants, and they rewarded him richly for the lies he told. Garbo wasn't alone. Agents like Brutus, Tate, and Zigzag each contributed their own pieces to the grand illusion. Their fake reports were funneled straight into the desks of Hitler's Abwehr officers, reinforcing what German reconnaissance already seemed to show: a massive buildup opposite Calais. Meanwhile, in southern England, construction crews built fake ports and harbors, wooden piers stretching into the water, empty warehouses filled with crates marked invasion supplies. From above, Luftwaffe reconnaissance planes captured exactly what Allied intelligence wanted them to see: long shadows of ships, dummy tanks arranged neatly, and what appeared to be massive fuel depots. Every photograph that reached Berlin seemed to confirm the same story: the Calais invasion was imminent. Behind the curtain, the deception was orchestrated with surgical precision. At Bentley Priory and London's war rooms, Churchill's intelligence chiefs, the masters of misdirection, synchronized the entire operation. Fake radio chatter filled the air, created by skilled signalers who simulated entire battalions communicating, requesting supplies, and preparing for D-Day. Messages were encrypted, decrypted, and leaked in just the right patterns to give them authenticity. It was theater, played out in wavelengths, whispers, and shadows. Churchill, ever the dramatist, followed the progress closely. He received daily briefings on how effectively the Germans were buying the story. At one point, When a reconnaissance photo showed Luftwaffe analysts highlighting the fake tanks near Dover as potential invasion staging grounds, Churchill reportedly smiled and muttered, "Splendid. Let them tremble at shadows." To make the illusion complete, the Allies even leaked fake orders and fabricated unit insignias, distributed to real soldiers in southern England who were instructed to accidentally be seen in pubs or shops, just enough for local informants to report their movements. Every rumor became another thread in the web of deceit. The deception reached so deep that the Germans began preparing defenses at Calais, reinforcing bunkers, and diverting divisions away from Normandy. To Hitler and his generals, the situation seemed obvious. The small landings in Normandy, when they finally came, were just a diversion, a feint before Patton's real army struck at Calais. The brilliance of Operation Fortitude lay in its layers. Every lie supported another, every false clue built upon the last. The agents' reports matched the fake photographs, the photographs matched the radio chatter, and the chatter matched the reconnaissance patterns. It was a perfect echo chamber of illusion, one that even the most skeptical German analysts couldn't escape. Churchill's secret war was working. The German high command was staring straight at the truth, and still couldn't see it. By early June 1944, Allied intelligence knew that Hitler had swallowed the bait. German divisions waited in Calais, panzer tanks stood idle, and the Luftwaffe kept its eyes on Dover, all while the real invasion fleet gathered silently on England's southern coast. As the storm approached, the greatest secret of the war was safe, protected not by guns or armor, but by the greatest deception ever told. D-Day, the lie in action. June 6, 1944. The world holds its breath. The greatest amphibious invasion in human history begins. Operation Overlord, the assault on Normandy. At dawn, Allied troops storm the beaches under relentless fire. The air is filled with the thunder of naval guns, the cries of men, and the roar of engines pushing forward toward occupied France. But while real soldiers fight and die on the sands of Normandy, somewhere hundreds of miles away in southeast England, an entire phantom army is still preparing to invade France. Inflatable Sherman tanks rest silently under camouflage nets. Wooden aircraft glisten under the summer sun. Radios crackle with scripted orders from imaginary generals. Trucks drive in endless loops to kick up dust for German reconnaissance planes. And incredibly, the Germans believe it all. From their bunkers, Hitler and his commanders study aerial photographs showing what looks like thousands of tanks and aircraft pointed toward the French port of Calais. Intelligence reports, fed by double agents, confirm it. The main Allied invasion hasn't begun yet. Normandy, they insist, is just a diversion. So while Allied soldiers fight desperately to secure the beaches, Hitler refuses to release his panzer division stationed near Calais, the very armored force that could have crushed the beachhead. He waits, convinced that the real invasion is still coming under General Patton's command. And Patton, the most feared Allied general in Hitler's eyes, is nowhere near Normandy. Instead, his name and reputation lend weight to the illusion. His first U.S. Army group continues to send routine radio signals, transmitting fake logistics chatter, movements, and supply requests. Every hour, they reinforce the lie. For weeks, the deception holds. German divisions stay locked in place, watching the skies over Calais, waiting for a second wave that never arrives. Even as Allied troops break out of Normandy, Hitler clings to the illusion. He is sure, absolutely sure, that Churchill and Eisenhower are luring him into a trap. By the time the truth dawns, it's far too late. The Allies have already gained a foothold, secured the beaches, and begun their unstoppable push into France. Operation Fortitude, the fake army, the phantom signals, the radio lies, has done its job. The greatest invasion in history succeeded not just through courage and firepower, but through a web of ingenious deception, where rubber tanks, false radio waves, and masterful psychological warfare reshaped the fate of Europe. How the deception won the war. The story of D-Day is often told through the lens of courage, strategy, and sheer firepower. Soldiers storming the beaches, naval bombardments shaking the cliffs, and the roar of fighter planes overhead dominate the narrative. Yet behind the scenes, there was another battle, a battle of wits, illusions, and psychological mastery, fought not with guns, but with deception. This was the war waged by Britain's and America's ghost armies, a war that many historians argue was as decisive as the fighting on the beaches themselves. By mid-1944, the German High Command faced a nightmare scenario. They knew an Allied invasion of Western Europe was inevitable, but they were completely uncertain where it would occur. Normandy? Calais? The sheer scale of the threat paralyzed their decision-making. And into this vacuum of uncertainty stepped Operation Fortitude, the brilliant deception plan that transformed a handful of inflatable tanks, fake aircraft, and double agents into a force capable of controlling the minds of the Nazi leadership. Operation Fortitude was more than just a diversion. It was a strategic stranglehold on German military judgment. The Germans were fixated on the 1st U.S. Army Group, Fusag, supposedly positioned in southeast England under General Patton. Reconnaissance photographs, false radio traffic, and carefully crafted reports all reinforced the illusion that this was the main Allied army, poised to strike at Calais. The Germans could not ignore it. Panzer divisions, the Wehrmacht's most potent armored formations, remained stationed near Calais, ready to repel an attack that would never come. This strategic misdirection had immediate and profound consequences on the actual invasion. On June 6, 1944, when Allied forces landed on the beaches of Normandy, they were vastly outnumbered in comparison to the German defensive plans. Yet, thanks to the success of the deception, the Panzer divisions, the units that could have rolled over the beachhead, were held in reserve hundreds of miles away, tied down by the very illusion that rubber tanks, wooden planes, and fake radio signals created. Every hour that the Germans waited, the Allies consolidated their positions, brought in reinforcements, and expanded their foothold. The effectiveness of Fortitude was not limited to the first day of the invasion. In the weeks that followed, German commanders continued to interpret every Allied move through the lens of the fake army. They expected reinforcements from Patton's Phantom Force to strike in Calais at any moment. Hitler himself remained obsessed with this non-existent army, issuing orders that kept his forces divided and cautious. The real Allied armies, meanwhile, moved inland, linking up and securing vital ports, airfields, and supply lines, operations that would have been far more perilous if the Germans had concentrated their forces at Normandy. The impact of this deception on the overall course of the war cannot be overstated. By immobilizing German forces and preventing a swift counterattack, Operation Fortitude directly contributed to the survival of the beachhead. Without the fake army, the Allies would have faced a far more formidable challenge, and casualties would have been staggering. Historian analyses suggest that the deception plan may have shortened the war in Europe by months, sparing countless lives on both sides. Soldiers who landed at Omaha, Gold, Juno, Sword, and Utah beaches might never have seen a safe landing if the Germans had been able to concentrate their full strength. Moreover, the operation demonstrated the power of intelligence, cunning, and psychological warfare as instruments of military victory. The Germans were experts in battlefield strategy, yet they were completely outwitted by a blend of creativity and human psychology. Inflatable tanks and wooden aircraft, while laughable in hindsight, exploited the enemy's assumptions and biases, making them tools of immense strategic value. Even minor details, like dust kicked up by trucks or fake construction of landing sites, played a role in convincing enemy reconnaissance that the army was real. Every layer of deception reinforced the others, creating an illusion so convincing that the Nazis never realized they were being manipulated. Operation Fortitude also highlights an important lesson in leadership and planning. The success of the deception required not just ingenuity, but absolute coordination between intelligence officers, engineers, double agents, and commanders on both sides of the Atlantic. Churchill and Eisenhower closely monitored the operation, understanding that the battle for Normandy was as much mental and strategic as it was physical. This interplay of human intelligence, creativity, and meticulous planning is a testament to the Allies' broader approach to warfare. Victory often depends as much on what the enemy believes as on the weapons you wield. In the end, the Ghost Army was more than just a clever ruse. It became a force multiplier, a tool that allowed the Allies to overcome numerical and logistical disadvantages. By keeping German divisions tied down, it ensured that the Normandy invasion succeeded, providing a crucial bridgehead for the liberation of Western Europe. Thousands of lives were saved, countless battles were shortened, and the course of history was altered, all because a fake army convinced one of history's most powerful dictators that he was facing a threat that did not exist. Operation Fortitude stands as a monument to the ingenuity, creativity, and audacity of Allied planners. It reminds us that wars are not always won by brute force. Sometimes, they are won by the clever manipulation of perception, by illusions, and by minds that understand the psychology of the enemy. The fake army may have never existed on paper, but its influence on the battlefield was real, profound, decisive, and historic. It was a deception that didn't just mislead the Germans. It reshaped the very outcome of World War II, proving that in warfare, sometimes what isn't real can be mightier than what is. The men behind the illusion. While the beaches of Normandy earned their place in history for the courage of soldiers braving machine gun fire and artillery, there was another set of heroes whose battlefield was made of smoke, mirrors, and paper. These were the men and women who built the Ghost Army, orchestrated the signals, and controlled the perception of the enemy. They never fired a shot in anger, yet their work was crucial in ensuring the success of D-Day. The story of the men behind Operation Fortitude is a testament to ingenuity, creativity, and the subtle power of psychological warfare. At the heart of this operation was General George S. Patton, one of the most formidable figures in Allied command. Patton was no stranger to the theater of war. His aggressive style and reputation for brilliance made him an ideal figurehead for the fictional 1st U.S. Army Group, FUSAG. By placing Patton in charge of the Phantom Army, the Allies leveraged not only his name but also his fearsome persona. German intelligence respected him, and the idea of Patton commanding an army poised to strike Calais created a psychological anchor in the minds of Nazi planners. Every decision, every piece of misinformation, was amplified by his reputation. Patton, in essence, became a weapon, not through the men under his command, but through the fear his name evoked. But Patton was only the tip of the iceberg. Behind the illusion were countless engineers, artists, and deception specialists who turned fantasy into a seemingly concrete reality. The inflatable tanks, wooden aircraft, and dummy landing craft were not mere props. They were meticulously designed to fool reconnaissance planes from high altitudes. Engineers calculated shadows, proportions, and placement so that even the most skeptical German aerial observer would be convinced. Wooden aircraft were positioned as if preparing for takeoff, trucks kicked up dust along fake roads, and dummy landing sites mimicked the activity of a real army preparing to strike. It was illusion turned into art, carefully choreographed with military precision. Artists played a surprisingly pivotal role in this operation. Their work went beyond painting camouflage or building decoys. They created convincing scenes of life, movement, and preparation. Canvas tanks, papier-mâché aircraft, and mock fortifications were designed with attention to detail, including the angles at which they would appear from the air. Their knowledge of perspective, light, and visual storytelling gave the Germans the impression that a massive army had assembled on England's southern coast. These men and women were soldiers of the imagination, fighting with paintbrushes, wood, and rubber instead of rifles and shells. Radio operators were another critical component of the deception. To make the Ghost Army believable, it was not enough to simply display fake tanks and aircraft. The Germans needed auditory proof of an operational force. Operators broadcasted coded messages, carefully monitored by German intelligence, simulating the chatter of a fully mobilized army. These messages, sometimes including mundane complaints about rations or logistics, added a layer of authenticity that visual deception alone could not achieve. Every transmission reinforced the illusion that FUSAG was real, ready to move, and poised to strike Calais at a moment's notice. Double agents, part of the famed double-cross system, were the final piece in the puzzle. These agents, operating behind enemy lines or even in Germany, fed meticulously curated information to the Nazi command. They reported on troop movements, construction of camps, and strategic planning, all fabricated or exaggerated to suit the Allies' narrative. The brilliance of these agents lay not only in their courage but in their ability to manipulate the enemy's expectations, ensuring that German planners were focused entirely on the false threat. The combined effect of visual, auditory, and intelligence deception created a multi-layered illusion that no single German officer could pierce. Ironically, many of these men and women never saw the battlefield. They worked in secret, in offices, workshops, and safe houses, far from the front lines. Yet their creativity had a tangible effect on the outcome of the war. Their work exemplified a different kind of courage, the courage to innovate under pressure, to challenge conventional military thinking, and to trust that an idea could be mightier than a battalion. By the time the real invasion unfolded, the Ghost Army had already won a significant portion of the battle by keeping the panzer divisions frozen in place, preventing them from reinforcing Normandy. Perhaps the most striking aspect of this operation is the sheer irony of the situation. Hitler, a military genius in many respects, was outsmarted not by generals in the field, but by a coalition of artists, engineers, radio operators, and double agents. Inflatable tanks and wooden planes, products of ingenuity and craftsmanship rather than firepower, held the balance of power in Western Europe. A dictator obsessed with numbers, formations, and tangible military assets was tricked by illusions, by an army that existed in perception alone. The very things that might have seemed insignificant, a small puff of dust, a fleeting shadow, a coded message, collectively shaped the course of history. The men behind the illusion remind us that war is fought on many levels. It is not only about guns, tanks, and bullets. It is about information, psychology, and perception. Without their contributions, the Normandy landings might have faced a far deadlier counterattack, with thousands more casualties and a far riskier foothold in France. Their work demonstrates that innovation and creativity are as critical as courage and discipline in warfare. In retrospect, the Ghost Army and its creators represent a paradigm shift in military thinking. They proved that the human mind can be a weapon as formidable as any artillery piece. While history rightly remembers the soldiers who stormed the beaches and the generals who commanded them, the true architects of the deception, the artists, engineers, radio operators, and double agents, deserve equal recognition. Through their ingenuity, they turned perception into reality, fear into an action, and a clever idea into a decisive strategic victory. Operation Fortitude, therefore, stands not only as a military achievement but as a monument to human creativity and resourcefulness in war. The men behind the illusion may have never fired a single shot, but their work saved lives, shortened the war, and reshaped the course of history. In the end, it was not the mightiest army, but the most imaginative minds, that proved capable of outwitting Hitler's war machine. Legacy and reflection. Operation Fortitude, the grand deception that convinced Hitler and his generals that the Allies planned to invade Calais instead of Normandy, remains one of the most brilliant stratagems in the history of warfare. Today, military academies across the globe study this operation not merely as a footnote in D-Day planning, but as a textbook example of psychological warfare, misdirection, and operational art. The Ghost Army, a combination of inflatable tanks, wooden aircraft, fake camps, and expertly crafted radio chatter, serves as a reminder that war is fought as much in the mind as on the battlefield. What makes Fortitude remarkable is not just its scale but the meticulous integration of human ingenuity, creativity, and audacity to achieve a strategic objective without a single direct engagement. For decades, the full scope of Operation Fortitude remained classified. Even after the Normandy landings, the world, and sometimes even participants within the Allied command, did not fully understand the scope of the deception. Files were locked, reports were hidden, and stories of the Ghost Army circulated only in whispers among those who had contributed to the operation. The architects of this illusion, from Patton's carefully orchestrated command presence to the tireless efforts of artists, engineers, radio operators, and double agents, often received little recognition during their lifetimes. Their contributions were overshadowed by the dramatic stories of men storming the beaches, tanks rumbling across open fields, and bombers pounding enemy positions. Yet without fortitude, the Normandy invasion may have faced a much fiercer and coordinated German defense, potentially changing the course of the war. The genius of fortitude lay in its multi-layered approach to deception. Unlike conventional operations, which rely on overwhelming firepower or tactical maneuvering, fortitude leveraged perception, timing, and psychological manipulation. Every detail was calibrated. Dummy installations mimicked real troop movements. Coded radio messages reinforced the existence of phantom divisions. Double agents confirmed the presence of forces that were never there. It wasn't just a trick of the eye, it was a trick of the mind, convincing the German high command that an overwhelming force was massing on the eastern coast of England, poised to strike Calais. This illusion forced Hitler to make a critical strategic error, keeping his panzer divisions near Calais, away from the true point of attack in Normandy. In effect, the Allies won the first battle of D-Day before a single soldier landed on French soil. Operation Fortitude also highlights the power of imagination as a weapon in war. In a conflict often defined by tanks, artillery, and aircraft, it was a combination of ingenuity and psychological insight that produced one of the most decisive advantages of the campaign. Inflatable Sherman tanks, wooden aircraft, and dummy camps may seem whimsical or even comical to the modern observer, yet they worked precisely because they played on the assumptions and biases of the enemy. The Germans, trained to respect reconnaissance and intelligence, were caught entirely off guard. The effectiveness of these soft weapons demonstrates that innovation is not only about creating new tools or machines, it is also about finding unconventional solutions to problems that seem unsolvable by conventional means. The operation also underscores the importance of human creativity and adaptability in war. The artists who painted camouflage, engineers who built mock equipment, and radio operators who meticulously crafted false transmissions were ordinary people performing extraordinary feats. Their battlefield was not a front line but a workshop, an office, a makeshift studio. Yet the consequences of their work were tangible, immediate, and historic. This teaches us that war is not solely about the bravery of those who charge into gunfire, it is also about the intellect, craft, and subtle influence exerted behind the scenes. The Ghost Army may not have existed physically, but its presence saved thousands of lives and shaped the course of history. Reflecting on Fortitude's legacy, it is clear that deception has become an integral part of modern military strategy. Today, electronic warfare, cyber operations, and misinformation campaigns echo the same principles first applied in Operation Fortitude. The lessons remain the same: control what the enemy sees and believes, manipulate perceptions, and exploit assumptions. The Ghost Army serves as a template for how creativity and intelligence can multiply the effectiveness of even the most conventional forces. Modern strategists study these lessons not to glorify trickery, but to understand the fundamental role of perception, information, and timing in warfare. Finally, the story of Fortitude is a reminder that history often celebrates the obvious heroes, the soldiers on the front line, the generals directing firepower, and the audacious pilots in combat, while the architects of perception are frequently overlooked. Without the vision, coordination, and dedication of those behind the scenes, D-Day could have faced catastrophic resistance. The moral is clear: the most powerful weapon in war is often the one invisible to the enemy, shaped not by firepower but by intellect, foresight, and imagination. As Winston Churchill aptly stated, "In wartime, truth is so precious that she should always be attended by a bodyguard of lies." Operation Fortitude was the ultimate embodiment of this principle. A fabricated army, composed of smoke, wood, and imagination, protected the real one, bought precious time, and helped secure victory. It serves as a lasting testament to the extraordinary impact of human creativity on the tide of history, reminding us that sometimes the battles that determine the fate of nations are won not with guns, but with ideas. In the end, the Ghost Army's legacy is not just military, it is human. It celebrates ingenuity, collaboration, and the belief that a clever idea, executed with precision and daring, can shape history in ways that brute force never could. Operation Fortitude remains a lesson that even in the chaos and carnage of war, the power of imagination and intellect can be decisive, and sometimes, the greatest victories are invisible, but unforgettable.